This week I thought I'd challenge myself to film using only inexpensive gear and things you can find around the house. Let's see if we can make this footage look not terrible. So it starts with the Canon T3i. I got this 6 years ago and it's now pretty cheap on eBay. I'm pairing it with this 24mm, which for me is the ideal first lens because it's not too zoomed in and can shoot at f2.8, meaning it is decent in low light. I then found some string in a drawer and used the old trick where you put the string on the bottom of the camera and make a triangle with your feet, using the tension to stabilize those shaky hands. It's also way more portable than a tripod, which is nice. For sound, I've got this little mic which can sit on the camera, but it'll sound better if we connect it to this little audio recorder with an extension cable. And then grab one of these, unscrew the bottom and tape a mic to it. I call it the Broompole Boom Pole. And lastly, for lighting, I got this fixture and the bulb was pretty cheap too. We don't need a light stand because we can clamp it to stuff. So as far as kit goes, that's a pretty basic package. One lens, no tripod. So I did not have high hopes for this footage. For the first shot I wanted to try out all of the kit, so I needed to block off this big window to make the room dark enough for our lighting. Now on a professional film set we'd use thick fabric, but I found some bin bags under the sink which are much cheaper. With a bit of tape I managed to block out most of the light and actually created quite a cool effect, so I'll save that idea for another project I reckon. Anyway, it still wasn't quite dark enough, so I grabbed a couple of towels and hung them up to block the light a bit more. It's the best I could do. After clamping the light to a stool, I positioned it where it could illuminate both of the actors, from this side or from the other side. The trick here when the bulb isn't very powerful is to get it as close as possible without it actually being visible. So I just had to make sure it was being blocked by the other actor. You also notice the background is quite blue because the daylight spinning through that bin bag window is much cooler than the DIY light, and that actually gives it a kind of evening vibe. But I'll be honest, this doesn't look great. Now, depending on the scene, this could be perfect lighting. Maybe we do want it to feel a bit cheap or a bit messy, but it is true that we'd have a lot more options if we had a brighter light. We could bounce it off a wall or diffuse it with some tissue paper, so I would recommend spending a bit more than I did. Or we could save our money and just take down those bin bags and make use of that lovely big light source called the sun. By setting up next to this large window, we get a soft light that wraps around, gives a very flattering look. Still using the string tripod, which definitely wasn't perfect. You kind of have to use a lot of tension to keep it stable. It would definitely help to use a lens with image stabilization, but obviously that's going to cost more. So a decent alternative is to use software stabilization when you're editing, and that can kind of smooth out the small shakes. Here's what it looked like before, and here's what it looked like after stabilizing. But honestly, next time I'd probably just invest in a really cheap tripod for these kind of shots. It's definitely worth having. Now let's look at audio. Because the room was fairly empty, there was some real echo. So I grabbed my drying rack and hung a towel on it to absorb some of those sound vibrations as they're bouncing around the room. Now I've actually used this audio setup before, and I'm always really impressed with the quality. In fact, I'm even using it right now for this whole voiceover, and it's just the classic techniques of making sure that the microphone is fairly close to whoever's speaking and that the environment you're recording in doesn't have like cars going past or like noisy air conditioning units. Do that and it'll sound pretty good. For this next shot, you can see here the window is mostly blown out, which is mostly something seen in amateur productions rather than like Hollywood films, although there are plenty of exceptions. But let's say we did want to hold on to that detail outside. Our best option is to make the whole image darker. Here I stopped down to f4.9, and now you can see we've got most of that detail back. But obviously the rest of the image is darker as well. So we need to then carefully brighten the image when we're editing. Now, I'm not going to pretend that doing this will work for every situation, but in this case I think it did work. At some point though, it's better to either just set up your own lights or just avoid showing the windows, like this. So what I love about doing these kind of challenges is that it really shows what makes a difference. Like, I spent a while hanging up those bin bags for these shots, but in the end, just working with what was already there was faster and cheaper. I've seen big budget shoots make use of these kind of DIY type hacks. Duct tape and a bit of ingenuity can go a very long way. So I'm glad to be practicing these low budget skills. But even so, a lot of you guys tell me I need to get a better camera. So I thought I'd rent a slightly better camera for the day, And so in next week's video, I'll be comparing the DIY footage with this monster. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you next week.